and there's a book sale out here. You're welcome to socialize and buy books, have them autographed. So I'd like to welcome Raymond now for to read it. So thank you. Welcome.
Hello, are we ready? Thank you. I wanted to make sure I had my interpreter with me. Adam Bartley is going to be working hard tonight. He's working solo, so poor fella. I don't know how he puts up with me. Okay, so a few things. I wanted to first thank Janice. Where's Janice? Just right there. So I thank you so much for inviting me here. And one of the reasons this is so special to me, and there are several, is because September of 2019 was some time ago when I I came here for one of my first readings. It was great. And then when I came to Gallaudet many years ago, this library was the first time when I came into this library. It was the first time that I'd been in a library but outside of my hometown. It was a small town library, uh, 85,000 people. And so it was shocking to be here in this modern building with its glass walls and huge, imposing building almost. But it was an amazing library to enter, and I'm honored to be here to read today. So today I'm going to be reading excerpts from 3 different books. The first, and they're all poetry readings tonight, and I'm not going to go into the background on all of the books at once, but first I'll tell some stories from one book, and the story of the book, then some of the poems from that book, and then the second book, and the third, each in its turn. Now, just a little quick background on me. I grew up in Michigan in the Upper Peninsula, and if you ever look at the map of Michigan, there's no real sign just for Michigan and the shape of it, but this is the way I like to represent it, because here's the mainland of Michigan, plus there's this oft forgotten Upper Peninsula that's way up there, very near Lake Superior. And I believe that's the world's largest, I think it's in the world the largest inland lake, but some 20 minutes span between the mainland and the Upper Peninsula. And of course, if you like snow, we have mountains of it. I remember when I was a kid, a little boy, it would always snow. And our house was on something of a hill, and we had a front porch. And there were several winters where we had so much snow that the front of the house was occluded with snow. And we had 8 siblings who all like mounted the roof to run around, and hopped on the snow and hopped on the roof, and everyone was scared. But it was a grand time. And one of the things that's so great about that is that the snow there is soft and puffy, and you can just land in it like it's a giant mat and play and romp. Whereas, here and then, if you go out to Minnesota, it's flat and icy and not nearly as comfortable. But the Upper Peninsula has fantastic skiing. And, being a poor, large family, I didn't really have the opportunity to do that much. We had, 6 ski resorts near my hometown, but I never went to any of them because we were a poor family and never had the funds to do so. So, yes, I grew up in a hearing family. I was the only deaf person in the family. And at that time, there weren't really any programs in my hometown. And again, it's a town of less than 15,000 people. And then in 67, then there was the iron ore mining was there. And the iron mines really ran dry, and they closed all of them shortly after. And thereafter, the community that I grew up in, always had this nostalgic remembrance for the good old days that were. And the town was on the decline. It was originally 30,000 people, and it shrunk to less than 5,000. So that's a little background on the town. Now, it so happens that I had oral education growing up, and I went to a town called Houghton. So if you look at Ironwood, where I was from, and I sign it like this, Ironwood, because it was a mining town. And for the purpose of this presentation, though there's not a standard sign for it, I sign it this way to represent Ironwood. So it's over here on the Upper Peninsula, just to the East Coast or eastern border, and so western border. And so then there were kids from this Upper Peninsula, the northeast of the Upper Peninsula, who were all brought to the same deaf oral program, and we were not allowed to sign. And so I stayed with the foster family during the week and went to my biological family during the weekends. And so I grew up feeling a sense of being orphaned from my hearing family. I had this foster family that was I was not a fully fledged member of, and then I spent the weekend with my biological family that I didn't feel as connected to. And so my life's journeys between these two worlds were somewhat disparate. And so I kind of felt like I had, three families or no families at all. At any rate, for the purpose of tonight, and I was just thinking about, how Madonna, the singer, is famous for each of her albums representing a particular persona, in a particular part of her life. So each of my books also has its own persona, and I don't like to repeat myself. I get bored easily with that. So I want to play with the language and really artfully work with it. So I'll be starting tonight with Babel, which is a translation of conversations seen and overseen. And so what does say the objects in your life, the chair that you're occupying right now, what does it think about you? What is the mind of the things in the world around you, and what do they represent? So, first, the title of this work. Oh, also, as I'm not going to go into the origin of every poem on its own. I believe the work should stand on its own. Okay? Let's start. Bubble gum. The first part of my life was just awesome. I lived 17 days in saliva before the girl popped me out of her mouth and stuck me right here under her desk chair. Dust soon covered my face. I couldn't sneeze. I kept waiting for her to remember. Didn't 17 days count for something? But no, her legs went cha-la-la in class. Sometimes she dropped her pen and picked it up, but she never looked me right in the eye. What kind of friend was she anyways? But then I started hearing other gums sniffling about in the neighborhood. Weird! At last, alone in dust, we all achooed. The next poem is First Dictionary, the American Heritage, Second College Edition. First Dictionary, the American Heritage Dictionary, Second College Edition. You've lived with me for 3 decades. But I must give you away to sleep. I haven't stroked your dog-eared pages in years. You've sat in the crate of my bookshelves watching me and hoping I'd call you up one more time onto my lap and rub your belly while searching for that perfect word. You've never left my side through 8 moves in 3 cities. You helped me define the loss of friendship and the many permutations of love. Those assholes made me cry. You made me a poet. Heaven will be filled with dogs I've loved, and you lived the longest. May your hard back turn into wings. May my heart's a tale that never stops. The next is entitled Mirror Ball. Spinning every night has gotten tiresome. It's a damn miracle that I don't have vertigo. I've got infrared vision and bionic ears. I can see and hear all that goes on in the shadows and black lights. I cast glittery hopes everywhere. Everyone watches me when they're not busy, texting to look important. It's the same old story. Girl wants guy, guy wants someone else, girl's still alone. Hey girl, come dance under me anyway. You'll remember this song one day when you're in the car, feeling old and fat with a squalling baby and wondering, what the hell happened tonight? Hearing aid. Hooked on the sweet flesh of her ear, I fish in sounds that she'll be able to recognize. The door opening, the oven timer dinging, the ambulance about to whiz by, a dog barking. Yet so many more things she won't be able to hear. Sorry, I didn't realize she was deaf and dumb. Hey, can you read my lips? Like this? Oh, wait, how about if I turn my head like this? Can you understand me? Yes? Gosh, why can't she speak if she's got hearing aids? No matter what sounds tumble against her eardrums, she doesn't need me to amplify the language of ignorance. She understands it perfectly. There are times when I wish I didn't have to hear. The next is entitled Dressing Room Mirror. My first year wasn't too bad. Young women preened their bodies with fuchsia spandex tops in front of me, never hearing my as I saw in their eyes their lost beauty, in need of reattainment at a price. Then my store went bankrupt, and I was sold to a maternity shop. The moon glow rising up from their wombs to their faces quickly lost its novelty. Motherhood was clearly not cut out for some of them. Then I moved uptown to a place filled with starchy pantyhose and beige walking shoes. I've seen way too many varicose veins. I'm forever young. You can kiss my glass. So that was from the book A Babel of Objects, which references objects in the environment talking to us, giving us their point of view. The next poems are from a book called Chlorophyll, which, of course, is the process of engaging the sun's energy and turning it into energy for a plant. So, I wrote a book this way to Acorns. This Way to Acorns was the other title of the book. And so in that text, I was examining my perception, kids that grow up in the Upper Peninsula. And kids are just fascinated with nature there. So growing up across from my mother's house, there were woods there. There were fox and deer and animals galore. That was our backyard. It was undeveloped and all pines. And then, when pines fell, they just laid there for ages. And so now things changed. This is the adult narrator revisiting the Upper Peninsula. Why giants don't exist in the Upper Peninsula. A long time ago, this was all very true. Giants never rested here in the Porcupine Mountains. Mere inclines lined with trees, existing only for their idle amusement, toughened as they chased each other. Trampling pines into mere shrubbery, they pealed laughs louder than church bells clanging throughout the land. Every single animal fled in fear of their deathly footprints. Then came the mating season of fee, fa, fo, fums, the raw trills meant to deafen as the grounds quaked violently from their consummations. There was not a tree standing upright left. Out of boredom, they up and left for the north, plodding through the puddle of Lake Superior. These giants had been so long used to being the tallest of all they'd ever seen, they never realized the depths of death they could sink to. Until it was too late, the chill froze their blood, icing their last thoughts in that magical summer, wild and crazy up in those tree-carpeted hills. From the deep, they're still gasping for help, grabbing at anything that floats above them. That much is still true. Now, the next 4 poems are all very brief, but I want you to imagine the seasons, each personified. So winter is a person, spring a person, fall and summer each in turn. So that's the idea. The orange-haired girl. Everyone keeps saying how beautiful autumn looks, even though she's still struggling to smile in her bed. After one false alarm of death after another, the doctors keep changing her prognosis. They marvel at the colors of her hair changing. No one says anything about the red-orange strands of her hair fallen to the floor in her hospital room. Their feet rustle rattlesnakes among their crispy leaves as they pretend she is still fire and glory. Having your days numbered is punishment enough. Soon there is no recourse but to pull the plug. The ground, stiff with rage, splinters, shovels. Trees grieve and shrink into stick figures. Bitterness becomes an art form. Trees grieve and shrink into stick figures. Bitterness becomes an art form. Tears hurt so much that even they seep into the bone. Next, in the nightclub. Winter always waits by the mirrored wall, smoking one cigarette after another. Everyone is afraid to look into his strobe light eyes, fluttering them into hollow shells of themselves by the time he's done French kissing them. But he usually dances alone. It is then the music stops and everyone stares, when he continues moving to the silence that only he hears. He shows no embarrassment when he catches sight of their gapes. They come here every night for his magic. You could say that he's developed quite a reputation. Mostly, what a terrible husband he would make. All that is quickly forgotten when they catch a single tear melting down his porcelain cheek. Next is Winter's ex-girlfriend. Spring is a girl who's cried all night, only to find that the morning easily forgives the coldness of him having left her. Stranded among the thicket of evergreens where rabbits dart and deer forage, with a kiss of sun each day, she will gather up all her strength, blessing the stiff soil. with the thawing of frozen tears seeping as she sleeps, and make true her dream of the day when her fingers are no longer numb. The one who left her will become a puddle when she rises to her full height and looks ahead. Summer, her true love, will soon fall for her, and she will one day die giddy in his arms, but shh, don't tell her. She's got a poor heart. Next is the mop-haired boy. Summer is a mop-haired, toothy-grinned boy who's never had to work a single day in his life. Lanky, yet never gawky, he ambles by, all the girls with petals in their hair, oozing gasps of nectar in his wake. Full of weed-induced giggles, he lazes about and says, "Man, what's happening?" a lot. Nights of fireflies puncture the haze of his vision. He inhales the poppy scents of romance, but it's not enough. So, heroin it is. He doesn't understand why nobody wants him now. He's forgotten how one can stink after not bathing for so long. Forced to enter a methadone clinic, he cuts his hair, seeing his own pock-marked face in the mirror. For the first time is a terrible autumn. Now, a little bit about this next book. It's called Once Upon a Twin, which seems a strange title. But my mother has told me 3 conflicting histories here. Now, I come from a family of 9 children. Now, my mother had 3 miscarriages as well. Let's see, and so I think the third was a case where my mother also comes from a family of twins. And so this was another example of a twin conception. And so it seems that she had a miscarriage early on in the conception. So one story I heard said that she was sitting on the toilet and the twin was lost there. Another story that I heard was that it was vitamins D and C or something like that. Correction, because of a surgical procedure. And so in the end, I ended up the one of 8 children, but and the only deaf one in the family too. But I was left with the question, what would have happened had my twin survived? And I had a twin in this hearing family. Would that twin have been my ally? Might they have been deaf? What if they were hearing? What if my twin was gay? Would they have been straight? Could they have been female? What might my life have looked like in this hearing family with the twin? So these musings prompted this book. I know I also grew up in a large Catholic family. 9 kids, you probably assume no birth control, Catholic. So at any rate, I have 3 poems from that collection. And it's probably the most Catholic book ever. This one is entitled My Corpse Self. Alone in these woods across the street from Mom's house, trails worn down become boundaries of a country with no name. It would take me many years to walk this meandering path across peat, concrete, grill, escalator, airplane, elevator, aisle. In between waited for clarifications, the only thing found in morass of trees and grasses? Was my shadow barely alive, panting for my kiss? Sleeping forlorn prince, he looked familiar, but nothing like a reflection. My watery self, not even close. Tall and lanky with a mask made of wood, stained and polished with veneer, perfected from years pretending to be happy, while people took him down behind his back. He threw tiny paper balls at them, always feigning innocence. Who, me? Surely you jest, their faces all said. I looked down at his lax skeleton in a faux shroud of Turin, his body spotted with grays, like a leopard gone starved. I didn't want to hold him. I didn't want to weight of his troubles when in my shoes a sea, pebbles, a relentless reminder, puncturing each step. Walked for miles. Couldn't a shadow be light easily blown away? Like how people dismissed me with a glance, just like my hearing family and classmates. Constantly cleaved mortar slabbed into bricks until my face turned unreadable. The darkness of him, transparent, bright, shining eyes begging me to save him, alone in these woods. Okay, something I should explain here is that many of young people may not realize, but when I was a kid, we used to have, hearing aids, but there were, prior to that, these larger, massive things called body aids, body-worn hearing aids that were large, massive things held around the neck that had wires leading up to the ears. That's important context for this. The title is Deaf Rich Boy, 79. I would one day be the son of that rich man with a monocle found in the game of Monopoly. I'd own the entire town beyond Pamita. I wouldn't think twice about buying a pair of expensive designer jeans at the Down Under shop. All the kids in my class would ask meekly to see my latest handheld electronic game. The kind that you couldn't find anywhere. The kind that kids would know everything about. The kind they grow antennae just to ferret them out. They turn into insects with shiny shellbacks gleaming with bands of gold strapped across as they murmured and compared between themselves, their dull scores blinking tiny sticks of red light. They'd huddle together and forget about everything. I'd wear the latest sneakers from JCPenney, the kind none of the kids could afford. They'd stare and gawk at me, of all people, when they thought me poor. What with 8 siblings and a dog packed into a house of only 4 bedrooms. My family weren't rich. Everybody knew that. But on that first day of school, I'd say nothing. My family weren't rich. Everybody knew that. But on that first day of school, I'd say nothing. As I hung my denim trucker jacket on my hook, in the hallway, they'd see the name Furstenberg stitched on the back pocket of my new jeans. I'd be wearing a Blondie t-shirt to show off the fact that I went to Minneapolis to see the sultry Debbie Harry sing Heart of Glass. For once, the hearing aid cords winding up to my ears would look cool, as if I were always listening to something cool that they'd never hear. Always straining to hear the next hot band. They'd wish to be deaf like me, always listening to the future. These kids in class would whisper about me, never mocking, but always with awe. Now, a brief explanation. You remember I talked about living with a foster family during my time in the Upper Peninsula at the school. There was one, Todd Alport, who was there, and he was my first hearing friend. And really, when I was going to the deaf oral program, I was with these deaf oral friends and so forth, and we used to gesture, not really fully sign, and speak. And so we were in mainstream classes, and there was this heavy set boy who sat there, and for some reason we ended up fast friends. And he was the first person who really defended me against some of the awful experiences I had with other kids taunting me. And he was the first to stand there in my defense. And really, had he not been there, I would have been completely traumatized. But he was my staunch defender right there. So this is about him. That one jet hockey game. Todd, you unexpectedly reappeared at my house in Ironwood one December evening, a year after I was transferred back home to Ironwood Catholic Grade School, 2 hours drive away from you. Teachers and parents had felt I would be a real mainstream success and closer to my family, too. No one seemed to care how much work it took me to lip read, even with my hearing aids. But anyway, there you stood. You were a bit taller. So was I. But in those days, nobody was sending off warning bells about the onset of puberty. You wore a button shirt. You met some of my siblings who were watching TV. And my mom, too. Maybe you met my dad, too. Your divorced dad had also relocated back to Ironwood, so you were visiting him. He didn't live too far from my house, just over the hill, actually, though I didn't know it at the time. So there you were with your impish smile. When we went downstairs to play jet hockey, I wanted to tell you about them boys at my new school who had figured out ways to make me cry so they could laugh at my nasal voice, missing consonants. I wanted to tell you how badly I missed you each time I stood by the brick wall watching them boys play Nerf football. I wanted to tell you how much I wanted to run away from home and hide in your bedroom off Royce Road so nobody but you would find me. I'd be your ghost friend, alive but never dead, always looking out for you. Instead, we stood facing each other on either side of the big jet hockey console, its blue and red markings printed on the formica ice of a hockey rink, punctured with holes to let air rise, allowing the flapjack puck to float across the sheen surface as if a UFO zigzagging. We played the game so hard with our round hand sticks, the puck sometimes flew straight up and slapped the low ceiling above us. We laughed so hard it was as if nothing between us had changed, and yet everything had. Oh, Todd, I lied about everything because I didn't want you to worry. And that's it. By the way, that book is available for sale. And one more thing before we go into a Q&A session is I'm doing another reading tomorrow night. Tonight is primarily poetry. Tomorrow night is prose. It's works of prose and very gay, if you're interested in that. It's going to be at Lost City Bookstore at 2467 18th Street Northwest at 7:30. And it's also going to be interpreted by this wonderful interpreter. Are you exhausted yet? I'm fine. All right, good. Good workout for the interpreter then. Okay. So I guess with that, we're open to Q&A. Come on up. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and wonderful. I'm glad you all came out. And if you have questions, we can get started. And I've got lots of questions. First is, when did you start taking an interest in reading and writing poetry? Thank you. You know, I came from this hearing family, and so hearing people may not be familiar with this new term that's come about in deaf circles. And hold on, let me think how to phrase this. Did you hear the joke about dinner table syndrome? Well, I'll tell you later. Hearing people may not get this joke, but let me tell you why this strikes a chord. So deaf kids grow up with hearing families, and what so often happens is at the dinner table, everybody's engaging in conversation, laughing, joking, whatever the case, and the deaf person can't follow. They can't see who's talking and what are they saying. It's difficult to lip read and follow that conversation. It's really impossible to do. The movies make it look like lip reading is a thing, but it's not so much a thing, really. Okay, so I remember I would ask my mom, hey, what did they say? Oh, I'll tell you later. And everybody would laugh and joke. But you learn, deaf kids learn that our needs to be included are not primary. We're second class and third class citizens in our own families. And sometimes an hour or 2 hours later, I'll go and say, oh, what were they saying that was so funny? Oh, well, I forgot. This is a repeated experience that we get. And deaf people are incredibly fed up with this. And they often don't want to go and associate with their hearing family, who have never bothered to learn sign language. Their pleasure and enjoyment trumps the deaf child's possibility of being engaged in the family and in the conversation. And that hurts. So, one of the things that I really liked was books. Because I don't have to work to lip read a book, right? If a hearing person and a deaf person read the book, we both see the words on the pages. Now, of course, this also depends on having vocabulary, skill sets, all of that. But if you've got eyes to view the page, you can read the page, whether you're deaf or hearing. And so I had my grandmother on my mother's side who was not a signer. But one of the things that she was incredibly intuitive. And we used to communicate by means of, with 9 kids, we would all have, mass, go to mass together and all pile in this sedan, and we go to grandmother's house for a little brief repast for, 30 minutes or something like that. But one of the things that struck me was how my grandmother on that side would always have this bowl of shiny pennies. And she would call me in particular. I don't know why none of the other grandkids, but she would always call me in particular and look at me, and she would put a penny in my hand and close my hand. Every Sunday she did this little ritual. She understood the importance of locking eyes and really making sure that we were deeply engaged with each other, even though we couldn't sign to one another. So this is my Sunday experience, Sunday after Sunday. And then in 1977, in October, I recall, I had a speech therapist. And most deaf people have awful experiences with their speech therapist in general, I guess. But this one was really unique, this lady. She was fantastic. She dyed her hair red, and her husband loved redheaded women, so off she went, dyeing her hair. She She was Italian and dyed her hair super red. And so one of the things that I absolutely loved about her is that she never talked down to me. For example, if I was asked to read a word, like erotic, if I asked about a word, erotic, she would never say, "Oh my gosh, that's a word, you don't need to know that word." She would explain, "Oh, it means sexual or sexy." She never tried to like talk down to me or, dumb things down for me. She treated me like a fully fledged person. And she didn't sign, but she still recommended that I go to Gallaudet. She told me about Gallaudet. And the ear doctor had, become an ear, nose, and throat doctor in Ironwood, and was how I encountered her. And she, gave me some homework. Her job was to teach me how to speak and pronounce things, right? So one of the other things that she taught me were hearing idioms, like "is raining cats and dogs," that kind of thing. Now, bear in mind that as a lip reader, it can be difficult to figure out what they're saying, and so when you get the text of those, you still need to understand what it means idiomatically. And so that really helped me with my lip reading skills. So I remember that in October, she said, "Why don't you write a poem, a 5-line poem called a limerick?" Limerick is typically 5 lines, and it came about by an English fellow who created the art form. And so it uses an AABB A rhyming scheme. And they're usually fanciful and light. So I had to write a limerick, and that was my homework. So my grandmother died very suddenly, and no one had explained to me what had happened. They assumed, I'd overhear and figure out what happened, but my grandmother had died. And so nobody sat down with me to explain what had happened and what all the hubbub was in the family. So I knew I had this homework, and just the act of sitting down to write it gave me a release I desperately needed. I remember I was 11 at the time, and I just never stopped writing. I think the first few years that I was writing, I guess the first 9 or 10 years, my poetry was bad, and I mean bad. But it was worth learning the discipline of the act of writing. So engaging in the writing really made a difference, because I had to think and write and move and write. And I almost couldn't think. I would sometimes get paralyzed in the process. And then I came to Gallaudet. And at Gallaudet was where I started learning more about literature. And there was a great group called the Consortium of Schools under Gallaudet. Or Gallaudet is a part of the consortium. And I think there are 9 different universities, American University and so forth, that have an agreement such that you can attend the other institutions without extra tuition. So let's say your university doesn't have like creative writing, maybe they didn't have at the time. I was able to take that at, say, American University. And almost every semester I took one creative writing class, but I shopped around the different universities and was able to garner the ideas from each. And it was a great influence. I still think it was a fantastic process for me. Now, some of the deaf community saw it as kind of odd that I would be pursuing English so avidly. But, there's an unfortunate history of deaf education having used English in harmful ways against deaf communities. And so the hearing people in teaching poetry didn't really have that background, but I kept studying and ended up getting better and better. And there was a university where they had a very popular poetry class, and I was like, all right, I've done lots of poetry. I can do this class. But apparently that class submitted your work for approval, and they only accepted, you had to submit poetry work to be selected for the class. So I submitted some. I ended up being accepted to the class. And they brought interpreters into the class. And I remember the teacher there was named Anne Darr. And she was a very well-known feminist and poet. And she was asking everyone who your favorite poets were. She was asking each one in turn who their poets were. And then it just so happened that I was last. And I said, I didn't have one. And she said, well, how did you get in this course? And she looked and was mortified. And, I was mortified and realizing, oh my gosh, if you want to improve, you really got to read lots of other people's works. And that's what I did. I did that throughout the semester, and I really improved a lot as a result of that. So that's a long way around to answering your question, I think.
You have time for more questions.
Okay, we have time for more questions.
Other people who have questions.
Are there other people who have questions?
Okay, look, more questions?
More questions? Come on up. Well, if you have no questions, then that means my presentation was the height of perfection. Thank you.
So, anyway,
Any questions from anyone?
okay, I have one more question. What type
Okay,
of
I have more questions.
work you on that?
What's the next project you're working on? Actually, that's a bad question to ask because I'm in the middle of writing so many projects. So Gallaudet University Press is aware of this, and I can tell you that, and what I've just done in fall is called A Quiet Foghorn. A Quiet Foghorn. Poems from a Deaf Gay Life. And so that one is just being published. And I've got a new book just published called Widower, age 47, seeks husband. And that's the one that's going to be featured tomorrow night. And then next fall, Gallaudet University Press is Far From Atlantis. And I'm just sending Atlantis in this fashion because you may be aware of the famed idea of this ancient Greek isle that had this, mystic civilization that was utopian and ideal, and then heaven chastised the island by sinking it into the sea. So the story that the book is about is interesting. So, Once Upon a Twin, it covers this period of life dealing with my hearing family in Ironwood. This text is an overlapping time period, but has a different focus of 3 particular years when I was obsessed with UFOs, with Loch Ness monsters, with Bigfoot, the $6 Million Man, and all of this stuff. I was just crazed over it for a period of years. And so these were my imaginings of my town as this sunken city of Atlantis, and that's going to be published in November. And then I have another book after that planned that is, and the first time I'm using ASL gloss in the title of the work. It's called Animal Land Wild. No, correction, the interpretation. Animals Out There, WILD. And it's a very different approach. And now Atlantis, as that text is very more formalized, hearkening back to sort of the Greek forms of poetry and so forth. But now here in Animals Out There, we're thinking about the UP, and that's why I have some animal gloss poetry, poetry published in ASL gloss, correction, the interpretation. And so it is we'll see what the world will make of it. But after that, I'm working on, finishing some books of poetry, short stories that are on the shelf. It's hard to predict what's next. Sometimes you shop stuff around and fear the rejection, and then are shocked when they finally accept the project and you got to move forward. But just finished a new book of poems, so we shall see. Any other question from anyone else?
More questions? Yeah, I think someone. Who is your favorite?
Hold on one second.
Who is your favorite poet now?
Almost all of them. No. I mean, there's some poets I'm not as fond of, but I remember I was for a while obsessed with Sylvia Plath. Now, not so much. Let's see. I know there was a period where I was obsessed with Walt Whitman. And now I'm reading a lot of Richard Wilbur. Marianne, oh, sorry, Marlin. Hacker. Sorry, I should slow down spelling these names of authors for all of you. Just fantastic poet. You know, he writes poems sometimes that are very traditional poetry, but it's easy to create bad poetry in traditional forms because it's almost like counting, right? And formulaic. You have to fit the rhyme scheme. But Marilyn does a very different thing. And you realize it is formal poetry in that same fashion, but it's somehow so much more depth. And I mean, just all salutes to that writer. Hacker's just amazing. Okay, other questions? Okay, what about deaf poets? Okay, so wait, what's exactly your question about deaf poets? Oh, let's see, what deaf poets? Well, you may be surprised. I really like Sarah Katz. I really like Sarah Katz's work. Let's see. Raymond Antromus, yeah. British author, very good. Any other questions? If there's no more questions, then we want to thank you very much for coming. It was wonderful. We enjoyed your poetry. And I hope you enjoy yourself. Feel free to mingle. And we also have books for sale over there and a book signing. We have no food and refreshments this time. Sorry. We stopped that, after the pandemic. But the next time I'm hoping we'll have refreshments again. Come and enjoy our summer programs. We're not ready to announce our summer programs, but we'll let you know soon. Feel free to mingle, ask questions. Raymond said thank you also, everyone. I know it's hard to compete with the internet, with social media, and Netflix for an audience. So I so appreciate all of you coming. I'm humbled and honored. It means a lot to me. Thank you.